meeting number 32 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. As you know, on Friday, April 23rd of 2021, the meeting was suspended, and so we're simply returning to where we left off. Colleagues, for your as a reminder, we are in the midst of a debate on Monsieur Fortin's motion of April the 8th, and so that has been circulated earlier in this meeting. Technically, what started on Friday, and so we're going to resume in the order of speakers that where we left off. So Monsieur Fortin will be first, followed by Monsieur Gord, followed by Mr. Sobera, Mr. Carey, Ms. Latanzio, and then Mr. Dong, followed by...
Point of order?
Point of order, recognizing the point of order, Ms. Shanahan.
Yeah, I believe I was on the, I was next on the speaking list. I did not have the opportunity to speak.
No, I did. I was able to capture the speaking list as it was left off on Friday's meeting, and so I do have this. I can assure you that you are on the speaking list now. Your hand has been raised, and so once we're completed with this list, we'll move on to today's list, which is Mr. Barrett and then Ms. Shanahan.
I'm sorry, Chair. I respectfully ask that you...
Point of order, Ms. Shanahan.
Point of order, yes.
Recognizing a point of order, Ms. Shanahan.
Yes, I would like you to review the speaking order with the clerk if need be, because I was immediately after Mr. Bachrach, and we recall that...
That's not a point of order. I have read out the speaking order and we'll continue. Monsieur Fortin will begin with you.
Speaker, could you repeat the speaking order again? I missed that.
Is that a point of order, Mr. Dong?
Yeah, it's a point of privilege.
Point of privilege?
No,
Mr. Dong, did you have a point of privilege?
No, I have a point of order. I just want you to repeat the speaking order if you could.
I'd be happy to, Mr. Dong. It's Monsieur Fortin, Monsieur Gord, Mr. Sobera, Mr. Carey, Ms. Latanzio, Mr. Dong, followed by Mr. Barrett, Ms. Shanahan, and then we'll continue down the line. So back to you, Monsieur Fortin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I was listening attentively last week to Mr. Fergus. Mr. Fergus talked about the amount of files that the committee had to study. And I do agree with him. There are a lot of important files to be considered. And I must say that I was flabbergasted to see that we've been spending so much time talking about a very simple motion. When I wrote this motion, I thought we wouldn't even need to talk about it before adopting it. And now we've been talking about this for hours and hours. And I do agree with Mr. Fergus. Mr. Fergus raised important points. He talked about the women who had been witnesses in the Pornhub study. We need to listen to witnesses. It's a very important file. And I'm quite sad to see that we're wasting a lot of time talking about this motion. This motion is a very important motion. I'd like to come back to my motion. All that I'm saying is that the committee asked for 3 witnesses to appear. And all we are asking is for a report to be produced. The 3 witnesses did not come to the committee, and the report was not produced. This was orchestrated by the government. And these are facts. I'm just talking about simple facts. These are facts. And I would like to come back to what Mr. Fergus was saying. Mr. Fergus said that this was not the case. In the motion, we mentioned that they received an order. Look at paragraph 5. We indicate that the committee noted. There's no interpretation about the word noted. I tried to only stick to facts. The committee noted that Minister Pablo Rodriguez appeared instead of Rick Tays. We were all there and we all saw what happened. After having ordered him not to appear before the committee. And Mr. Fergus said that this was not the case. I would like to ask Mr. Fergus and the members of the committee to read the letter that we have all received. We received a letter from Mr. Rodriguez. We received a letter. It was actually an email, if I'm right. So Mr. Rodriguez wrote us an email on March 28th. And in this email, Mr. Rodriguez mentioned, and I would like to quote him. So it's in the last paragraph. Mr. Rick Tace, Director of Policy for the Prime Minister, was instructed not to appear in front of the committee, and I will appear in his place on Monday, March 29th. So this was not invented. This comes from an email from Mr. Rodriguez, and he told Rick Tace not to obey an order from the House. I do not want to judge Mr. Rodriguez, and I don't want to be judging Mr. Tace, but we have a job to do here. We have to tell Parliament that an order was adopted, and this is what happened. When we look at the following paragraph, we talk about Minister Mona Fortier. And in this case, we received a letter on March 30th or March 29th. And in the last paragraph, it's almost the same thing. Mr. Amit Pal Singh received an order, and we're not talking about instruction here, it's an order to not present himself before the committee. I will be a witness on March 31st, 2021. So we're talking about two ministers here, Minister Rodriguez and Minister Fortier, who have said that an order from the House, an order from the chair of the Ethics Committee is not important for them. This is of no concern to them. It's not you who is deciding, Mr. Chair. It's not the Parliament who's deciding. There's no authority here. The real power belongs to Mona Fortier and Pablo Rodriguez. And I find this really flabbergasting. It's shocking. It's an affront to democracy, to the authority of the House, and it is unacceptable in a democracy. This is my opinion, and I will repeat it in the House if need be. As a member of this committee, all I'm saying is that we must report these events to the House of Commons. And I'm not being emotive. Even if I'm feeling a lot of emotion right now, I tried to stay calm in my motion. I'm just stating facts. And we're just telling the House that we're dissatisfied. So we are here in order to express our dissatisfaction. And this is a very neutral expression. The House will do what it wants to do with this motion. But as you know, it's very difficult to determine what the House will do with this. But it is our responsibility to report these events. And then the House of Commons will decide what it wants to do with this. I could talk about this all day. I know that I have some colleagues who will be talking at length about different viewpoints and will be expressing their viewpoints on this subject. But if I could, Mr. Chair, I would tell you that I would like to vote on this now. I know I can't do this, but this is what I'd like to request. I think we should vote on this right now, and we should then move on to important business. This is important for Quebecers and Canadians. We should be doing an efficient job, and we're not being efficient right now. We're just waiting around, and this is a very simple and straightforward motion. So I will stop here, and I would like to ask the committee to report these events to the House of Commons. Thank you very much.
I'm going to poll the room because I think that there is an effort by many members of the committee to ensure that this gets to a vote so that we can get on to important business. Is there support to move to a vote now? getting a lot of
no, Chair.
yays and a lot of nays, but we do require unanimous consent in order to move to a vote. If there's somebody still on the speaking list, and I see several members indicating by their motions, either by their hands or their heads nodding that that they're not in support of that. And so we'll move to Monsieur Gourde. Monsieur Gourde.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have been wanting to talk at this committee for a long time, and I just feel as if I'm sitting at a desk with a lot of paperwork and nothing is being accomplished. Unfortunately, we have deployed so many efforts in so many files, and it's really sad and disheartening to see this. I've lived through difficult situations in other committees, but we always finished by voting on something. It would take 1 hour, 2 hours, 10 or 40 hours to say that you're for or against, but we're all adults here, and we have to understand, everyone must understand that we're going to have to vote on this sooner or later, and I think it would be really unfortunate to waste all of the Ethics Committee's time, to waste all this time until the month of June just because you don't agree with the motion. You can vote against the motion or vote for the motion, but you have to vote. This is our role and this is our responsibility.
We should be voting as soon as possible because our time is paid for by the taxpayers and they want us to work. They understand that we are not always in agreement on everything, but sooner or later, they're going to ask us to do our work. So we're going to have to vote and get on with the work that is important for us and for them. I understand Mr. Fortin's frustration. I'm not going to take half an hour to say that I also want us to vote on this and get on with our work. That's what we're here for. We're here to work, to finish what we started. Otherwise, we're going to lose everything. The testimonies, everything, all the work we've done, it's all going to die on the order paper. And we're going to be known as a lazy committee. And to me, that is really unfortunate because we were able to do very useful work, but right now we're not doing any useful work. That's really unfortunate. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll leave others who want to speak for a long time to take the floor.
Thank you. We're going to turn to Mr. Sobera.
Oh, good morning, everyone, and again, happy Monday. I think this is the first time I've had an opportunity to speak during the committee's proceedings in a number of days, and obviously have a lot of thoughts on the work that the committee has been doing, and obviously discussing Mr. Fortin's motion that is in front of the committee, but also the committee's direction overall. I understand MP Gourde's sentiments, and I have a lot of respect for MP Gourde in terms of his role as an MP, but his work more importantly, because I do know he's an individual with a lot of integrity, and I agree with Mr. Gourde's suggestion that the committee does have a lot of work ahead of it, that the committee definitely has a mandate to do the good work that our constituents sent us here and to do the good work of all Canadians and for all Canadians, of course. We've spent a lot of time discussing not only Mr. Fortin's motion, and if I can take a step back in terms of how we arrived at Mr. Fortin's motion in terms of what has been proceeded during this committee, during testimony also at Finance Committee over the last, I would say almost a year. We're coming up to pretty soon, like 8-9 months. And I look at Mr. Fortin's motion, and again, Mr. Gourde, you're, bless you if you sneeze there, I think. And I look to Mr. Fortin's motion, and I don't see, first of all, as we've stated in a number amount of times, and as has been set by the precedent by the former government, ministers do need to appear and not ministerial staff, and I think that needs to be pointed out. Secondly, that on point 6, and I know Mr. Fortin pointed out point 5 on his motion, that point 6 that that Minister Fortier has that Minister Fortier also ordered witnesses Amit Paul Singh and Benchin not to appear before the committee, as mentioned in her letters to the chair dated March 30th and April 7th, 2021. I don't know where that came from. I don't know if I am missing something, then please someone do point that out to me. At this moment in time, I'm not too sure that, and I cannot confirm from the information that I've received, and probably information that we've all received on committee, that Minister Fortier in any sort of way told anyone not to appear. She appeared here as a minister. She appeared as a minister of the Crown to answer questions. The opposition or the other parties decided not to ask the minister questions, and that was their prerogative. I believe the meeting was ended, so I'm not too sure on that nature there. And as we, and I'm just looking at my notes again. It's a responsibility of the ministers to appear here before our committee, and not for individuals representing from individual offices. Now, I'm not too sure what the intent of this motion is from Mr. Fortin. Is it to provide information to the House that ministers appeared in lieu of their staff or staff members, which we know was the nature that was done for in other governments? That is, ministerial responsibility is the correct thing. Is it that we're being prevented from finalizing the report on this study that we've undertaken and that we're near conclusion? I personally have invested a lot of time in looking at the other studies that the committee has been and will be tasked with, namely obviously the MindGeek Pornhub study, because that is an ongoing, very important study for our committee. I understand in the province of Quebec, there's even heightened sensitivities are important to that study. And I know many, if not all Quebecers, much like here in Ontario and all Ontarians, want us to resume that study, want us to make recommendations, and also want us to ensure that we hear from the other individuals on that committee. On the study, and then we obviously have turning to BC11 as well. So that's where I stand with regards to Mr. Fortin's motion. In my humble view, if we were to proceed to being able to get to write a report, put our recommendations down, why this motion couldn't be simply just amended or looked at, and these are just my humble thoughts, and be looked at in the light that, well, if Mr. Fortin wanted just to have this appear in the appendix of the report, for example, just something very simple to the fact that that the ministers were able to appear here. And I'm not saying I'm putting forward an amendment, Chair, or not. I'm just speaking with thoughts, because we've had in this report and in the testimony that I've been privy to, or I've had the privilege of seeing. We've had the Kilberger show up for 7 hours. We've had the Katie Telford show up for several hours. We've had the Prime Minister show up for several hours in prior testimony. Here we've had witnesses come back to us, ask questions. We've received literally thousands of documents on this study, and we do need to finalize this. I agree with Mr. Gurr. We do need to move on. I don't think any of one of us want to be debating Mr. Fortin's motion until the end of June. I don't think that's really the will of the committee. At the same time, I do have significant concerns with Mr. Fortin's motion. In my mind, I can't see why some sort of conversation take place where the ministers of the Crown came to this committee, were appeared on behalf of the government. Minister Rodriguez answered several questions from the committee and from our committee for an extended period of time. Minister Fortier was ready to answer further questions from the committee, but then the committee chose not to. The committees was closed, and that was it. And I think that's this government followed the precedent set by the prior government in terms of having ministers appear. And I think that was the right thing to do. I think ultimately ministers are accountable. I know on my team, I express all the time that everything that happens with regards to me being as a member of parliament, I have to be accountable for whatever happens in my office and be knowledgeable of. And that's the way I operate. And I think that's the way I think is the right way to operate organizationally. For any such organization and entity, and again to Mr. Fortin, I look at this committee, I read it, understood it, heard all the conversation take place with all our colleagues, and in terms of that, the committee report these events to the House of Commons in order to express this dissatisfaction. I just don't see why it couldn't just be that the that this be reported in the appendix of the report. If that was the committee's will, and I think that's something we need to examine. I think that's an alternative where because we've had so much testimony at this committee, because we've had, like as I stated, and I don't want to be chair. I don't want to be verbose this morning. I don't want to repeat myself. We have a lot of work in front of us. We have there's stuff on the notice paper and the House of Commons. There's the budget, which we know it's going to assist all our residents. And I don't want to veer onto the budget, obviously, because that's not part of today's motion. We have a lot of work to do as parliamentarians in the coming weeks. We're obviously still in the third wave of the pandemic here in Ontario. We need to ensure we get the supports out to all our businesses, workers, employees, and so Quebec is facing a third wave, in BC and now Nova Scotia and many other provinces. So we know we have a lot of work to do, and part of that we have the study in front of us, which is the we study, if I can refer to it as that. So I think if it's something I do wish to put forward, and if I can go with this an amendment, maybe we can get the language to you Chair, in terms of amending, putting forward amendment to Mr. Fortin's motion. And to discussing Mr. Fortin's motion, in seeing where we can arrive at something where we can proceed forward, and in terms of, and I want to just gather my thoughts before succinctly thinking about where I want to get to, Chair. In gathering our thoughts as how we as a committee can move forward. We do know, again, that we have spent endless hours on this study, and we, and I think about how this even we got to this point where a note was sent in, and I was over the weekend looking at my LinkedIn account. I think I have about over 2,000 contacts over LinkedIn, and received notes from a number of people. And also how we all work with stakeholders. We all work with stakeholders, and stakeholders reach out to us. I know, for example, to the chair and to my Conservative colleagues, on one issue with the wine industry, I know MP Baldinelli and myself and others have worked extensively with the wine industry. And I'll take this back to the conversation at hand, Chair, where we've been able to work with the wine industry to ensure we have a prosperous wine sector. And there was something in the budget there. Well, we only did that in interacting with obviously the representatives from that sector and reaching out to the various ministers' offices to raise issues. That's part and parcel of our job. And again, on this one here, you know, we had a LinkedIn note sent saying, you know, thank you for hearing me out. Thank you for our conversation. And that was the precipice of, or the catalyst for then the various individuals to say, oh my God, well, something untoward happened. Well, not really. We all deal with stakeholders all the time. And we all deal with entities that reached out to us to inform us. I'm sure, Chair, or many of your members from the beautiful provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan deal with the beef farmers or dairy farmers or chicken farmers or whoever in the agricultural sector, or lentil, you know, barley, wheat, and that was the catalyst of how we got to on this motion, and why these individuals were appeared, and why specifically Ben Chin was asked to appear, because there was a LinkedIn note. And funny enough, you know, on Saturday, I was reaching out to the residents of my riding and asking them how they're doing, and I was looking at my LinkedIn account, and that's how Ben Chin was asked to appear. That's how Ben Chin's name is now in this motion that Mr. Fortin presented to us. And I go back to it. So I almost think, like, when to Mr. Gould's comments, because je suis d'accord, and you know, we need to move on. We need to finalize this study. I do agree. At the same time, I think we've sort of gotten, as a committee, potentially and possibly, unfortunately, sort of bogged down in looking at this motion and saying, well, what this motion, what does it serve, and B, how does this motion come out to relate to the study at hand? And I'm having a hard time with that. And Mr. Fortin, and I do respect every MP equally, and try to cordially always have a great working relationship with all MPs on all sides of the aisle and of all political views, even my colleague on public accounts, MP Green, who I may differ vociferously on many things in terms of policy, but obviously respectfully, I always do a respectful disagreement. So for me, it's looking at this motion, MP Fortin, you know, to maybe break the log jam and to look at it from other points of view, I think is going to be in sort of due order, so we can complete the study and then move on to a further study, and wrap this up and get to the Pornhub MindGeek. I know the individuals in that study, the individuals we had, have reached out to me personally, and you know, and said they really would like to continue to present, and if that's an opportunity, they would love that, of course. On this study here, on the we've exhausted our time on this, and we need to wrap this study up, but we need to do things, I think, in a manner that's prudent, and a manner that obviously reflects the will of this honorable committee and my honorable colleagues. Again, I'm and the reason, and if I can even step even a big step back, is the motion here. You know, the idea of calling parliamentary staffers, bringing them in or not, and any government of any stripe saying no, which the Conservatives did in the prior Parliament because of ministerial accountability, and then then getting to the point where then this is reported back to the House. So this is, again, you know, potentially could be repeated in a future government where, you know, the ministers are accountable, do appear, questions aren't asked because the parties say, well, no, I don't want the minister to be here. I want that particular staffer. I want this particular staffer. And again, I go back to the fact Ben Chin's name is here because of someone, or the Kilberg is sending a note to him saying, thank you very much. Just thank you. Well, now we need Ben to appear here for 6 hours to ask him every question under the sun. And we want to go into that fishing exposition. And I think that's what really sort of got to me, because as a parliamentarian, many people reach out to us, and MPs reach out. As a parliamentary secretary, national revenue minister, MPs reach out to me from various parties. I know with Mr. John's, the Democratic Party, the honourable member from Windsor, has reached out to me several times on various issues dealing with international taxation issuance, and we've collaborated very effectively on that issue and other issues relating to Canada, U.S. And it's to the point where I think I think in this terms here of just having Ben Chim come on. Oh, Ben, you need to come on, or this individual, this staffer needs to come on because a note was sent, when there was really nothing wrong with that. Just saying thank you for listening to us, and I get the fact, and I'm all, believe me, inside of me, transparency and accountability are two pillars within my DNA, and I say that because in terms of democracy, and in terms of any committee's operations, and in terms of how we operate as a society, a civil society, transparency and accountability are the only things that count for me, and all that in all levels. So for me, with that, transparency and accountability starts with the ministers, and that's where the end with the ministers, and that's where all we can go and all we can do, and it's just so important that we focus on that, and that is why, the original motion to call these parliamentarians, I was offside, and then the motion now to report this back to the House, is something where has left me, Mr. Fortin used to use the word dissatisfaction at the end of the motion. The end of the motion where it says dissatisfaction, I'm actually dissatisfied with the original motion, and now with this motion, I'm dissatisfied because it points us in a direction in terms of the accountability and transparency of saying the ministers should be responsible, not the ministers should be responsible. No, that the staffers should be responsible, not the ministers. It should not be there. The ministers should be responsible. I, much like myself, have a wonderful team that works for me. I think one of them is on the committee right now. At the end of the day, and they do great work for me, and they work extremely hard. But at the same time, I think our office is not open, but somebody's knocking at the door, and I cannot answer that. At the same time, we need to ensure that the accountability stops with the ministers, and that's been my point of view all the time. And I believe it was former House Leader Jay Hill. I think it was him, and if I'm mistaken, then please correct the record on that. It was former House Leader. I think it was even John Baird who appeared before a committee. And I think that is something that we really need to think about. And that's why I think in this motion here, going, in my thought process, going to that point and saying, we're going to report to the House that these parliamentary staffers did not appear. I think that's a very, very, a very dangerous thing. I think that's something that I really think to give we need to give a collective rethink about that, and so forth. I understand it was the will of any member that they can put forward a motion, and that is obviously, and they do so. I think the original idea of bringing these parliamentary staffers, and remember I go back to the front. We remember the catalyst was because a LinkedIn account received an email of thank you. And actually, the way LinkedIn accounts work, it's actually pre-set up. When you log in and you respond to somebody, actually it's reset up. You don't have to type it just there. You can just put thank you for reaching out, thank you for congrats. It's actually quite easily set up. And I know I received emails from individuals from literally all over the world, as well, usually from Europe or here, from North America, with regards to, let's connect, thanks for connecting, Francesco. Let's hopefully we can work together. Hope you're enjoying, hope you're well. Great initiative on the part of the government, or even, questions relating to initiatives. I receive that all the time, probably 10, 15 messages a day. and that's why I go back and specifically, singling out Ben in that email between folks. That's what LinkedIn accounts are, and that's why we're here today. And that's why we're here at this motion. So again, Mr. Fortin, I respect the work you do. I respect your advocacy, so forth. But at the same time, I think we need to come to, I think, a conclusion to this study, because I want to move on. I definitely want to move on to the MindGeek Pornhub study. I have the 45 briefs that my team and I are going through at this moment, making recommendations, because we know how important that is. We know how important that is to all Canadians. We know how important that is with the presence of the MindGeek Pornhub in the Greater Montreal area, or in Quebec and La Belle Province, and we know how important that is to all our thing. But we also know how important it is to conclude this study with this motion currently in front of us. We know how it is so important to get this. And like I said, my thoughts continue to percolate in terms of putting forward something that I think hopefully we can work with, in terms of, if we were to present the scenario being that if we presented a report, and when we concluded the report, that in the report that we can conclude with in an appendix. Oh, I think somebody just spoke, and an interpretation has opened up their. Oh, can I continue to proceed to speak? I think we have two. I'm looking at my screen. I have two folks with their mics unmuted, but I'm sure that's we're at the best of times. We're not perfect on that, and even after a year, I'm still not perfect at that, and I don't think any of us have all. But I'm still percolating with the fact that maybe there's a compromise, or there's a conclusion that we can reach to get maybe within the folks, and say, hey, you know what, we understand the various parties' views on calling parliamentary staffers. Our view is that ministers need to be held accountable. In fact, the Conservatives' view is the same thing, that ministers should be held accountable. At the same time, potentially being able to see Mr. Fortin's motion and look at it and say, well, potentially it can be, I'm still percolating on this, much like I could probably have another coffee at this point in time, that we could potentially put this into the body of the appendix of the report, excuse me, where that this could be noted, and I think that could be something that we could potentially work with. And I keep thinking back, how would that work, and could that process potentially be that we could go. And I just want to make sure, I'm just been writing this down to make sure I can come up with it. I just want to make sure if I do, if we can go down this path and potentially talk about this and gather my esteemed colleagues' view on this. I know this is, I believe, week 2 or 3 of the 5-week sitting period before the May week, where we get to be back in our constituencies. So I hope that we can further speak as to how we proceed in terms of wrapping up this study, getting it so the analysts can proceed in writing up their thoughts, ourselves and each individual MPs being able to proceed and provide their thoughts, and as a team, as a collective team, so we can reach to some sort of conclusion. Obviously, we know with regards to the study that this motion is in reference to, and so forth. I know MP Johns is here covering his esteemed colleague from Northern Ontario, MP Angus, and I welcome him this morning. I don't want to say I feel bad for you coming here this morning, but nonetheless, it's always nice to see you, Gordon, and always enjoy your company and chat and conversation. But I think at the same time, we have received further documents on regards to the goings on there. We've received some pictures and so forth, which is important. at the same time, we want to reach a conclusion, Chair, and I think that is something we all want to get to. I don't think any one of us at this point in time do not want to conclude this study and move on to the other studies at hand and get these things wrapped up. I believe one of my colleagues mentioned that in terms of one of my colleagues mentioned that we don't want to be talking about this in June. We don't. There's been more news today that has transpired with regards to our other study that we've been looking at in reference to Pornhub, MindGeek, and I think it's important that we get to that study to really get things firmed up because that study is very, very important to our constituents. I think this study here, if I could rank the importance, pales in comparison to ensuring that non-consensual images are utilized on the internet in reference to where we are with this study here in Mr. Fortin's study, Mr. Fortin's motion. I apologize. I think in terms of the news coming out, I believe from Montreal this morning that the executive's home is no longer standing in terms of potentially being there's some sort of fire that happened, unknown cause at this point in time. It behooves a committee that we do proceed and wrap this motion up and this study up and proceed and move to get to the motion, the Pornhub MindGeek study. I think that's a very, very significant importance. And I think we need to continue going down that point. And in fact, going back to the representatives that were here from the prior study on the prior meeting with regards to their reappoints. If I look at excuse me, I just wanted to pull something up. This morning's La Presse story on Pornhub, where the title is "J'ai voulu mourir," which I believe means I wanted to die. It's something that there is, publication sans consentement, consent sur Pornhub. With again, Carolyn Tozine this morning has put out from La Presse an article on Pornhub and MindGeek, and I know how important that this is to the people in the Belle Province and to all Canadians. And I'm just looking at some of Caroline this morning speaks to an adolescent named Catherine.
She was a victim of sexual exploitation. She became an escort as a young adult.
Her sufferances with addiction and she's
Monsieur le
25
Président,
years
l'appel
old.
au règlement.
Point of order.
Monsieur
Monsieur le
Fortin.
Président,
Mr. Chair, I think, with all due respect, that what Mr. Sorbara is talking about is very important. But now we are talking about a motion, and we're no longer talking about the motion at hand. We should speak about this motion before getting to Pornhub. It's not that it's not important, but let's get back to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Fortin. Mr. Sobera, I was sensing that you were getting completely off topic there for a bit. I'll encourage you to get onto the subject that we are, just because I do believe that you've expressed, as well as other committee members have expressed, the desire to move on and get to a vote and complete this so that we can get on with other work. But we'll turn back to Mr. Sobera. On that point of order, Mr. Fergus.
Appel au règlement.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I absolutely understand your point. I agree that when you're talking about a motion, it's important to be relevant. But I think that Mr. Sorbara was establishing a distinction, if I have understood him correctly. He was establishing a distinction. He was explaining that there is a cost that has to be assumed because we're not focusing on the priorities of the committee. And I think that's why Mr. Sorbara was talking about that.
I do agree with you, Mr. Fergus and Mr. Sobera and Mr. Fortin. I think there's a solution to this. it is clear as the chair that we're not going to come to a consensus with regards to where we're headed. My suggestion now is to move immediately to a vote on the motion, allow committee members to determine if we support it or if we don't support it. After which we can determine what next to consider as a committee with regards to future business. Is there a willingness to move to a vote on the motion? I'm getting several thumbs up, and I'm getting, I think this, Ms. Shanahan opposes it, Mr. Sobera opposes it, Monsieur Fortin supports it, Mr. Carey supports it, Mr. Fergus opposes it, Mr. Dong isn't indicating one way or another, Mr. Barrett is in support of it. So as Monsieur Gord and Mr. Johns are both supportive of it. As you can see, colleagues, we're a divided group. I keep hearing members of the committee urging me to allow things to move along. But as you can see, this is I'm in a position where I cannot move things along until such time as the speaking
Point of order
has been exhausted. Ms. Shanahan.
Point of order, Chair. I regret I was first on the speaking list here today from a meeting that was suspended from last Friday. I had many points that I wanted to make on this motion, and you declined to allow me to speak. And now you're naming out members on their vote whether to continue or not continue a discussion on something that we don't agree with. So I'm sorry.
Thank you.
But
thank you, Ms. Shanahan.
You refused me the option to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. You haven't been refused. You are on the speaking order. You will be on the you will get a chance to speak if your colleagues allow you to do that. But as long as other members are ahead of you on the speaking order, they do have the floor until such time as they give it up. And so I think it's important because members of all parties had indicated to me that they wanted to move this along. And I think it's important for us to, as the chair, I think it's important for me to explain why we can't move forward. The reason we can't move forward is because the members that are on the speaking order want to continue to speak. And when I've offered the opportunity to move to a vote, to move this along expeditiously, members, as I've pointed out, are divided on the issue. And so I'm unable to do that.
Point of order.
Mr. Dong, on a point of order.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for you, Chair. It's not an easy job. But respectfully, I just want to point out the fact that the, committee members like Mr. Barrett, Mr. Fortin, I can name a few others, including on our side, Mr. Fergus has, and today we hear from Mr. Sobera has spoke in length and several times on this motion. I have not had a chance to speak to this motion. So that's why I think I need to be heard. That's the expectation of my constituents, and that's why I think we should continue on the debate.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dong. I appreciate that. What I would encourage members, as you can see, that there is members have a right to hold the floor as long as they want, once they have the speaking, once they've been given the floor. But out of common courtesy to people like Mr. Dong, who have not had an opportunity yet to speak on this motion, I would encourage members to make their points and then cede the floor to your colleagues, because I am sensing a growing frustration, as has been demonstrated through the interventions by other members, that they haven't had an opportunity to speak. And so, Mr. Sobera, I will turn it back to you, but I will encourage you that your colleagues, and as Mr. Dong has indicated, he is frustrated that he is unable to get the floor. And so Mr. Sobera will
Point of order, Chair. I just want to be
Point
clear.
Of order. Mr. Dong.
Thank you, Chair. My frustration was not the fact that, my colleague has expressed their point of views. I'm patiently waiting for my turn. My frustration is not with that. My point of order is that I try to explain the reason why.
Mr. Dong, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dong. I think there is only one way we can move to a vote, and that's when we exhaust the speaking order. And so these continued delays will simply drag out the length of time until we can get to a vote. And so I'm taking note of people's frustration that they haven't been able to speak, and that this has continued so that we're not able to get onto other committee business. Everybody who has spoken has urged the committee members to move forward, but I'm explaining that there is only one solution to that. And that is that we make our points as quickly as possible, allow the speaking order to be exhausted, and allow for a vote to happen. Mr. Sobera, will return to you.
Thank you, Chair. Correct. The floor is the current member of time member, and I do wish to welcome MP Angus back to the committee this morning. And great to see you, MP Angus. Your honorable colleague, Mr. Johns, did a spectacular job in representing yourself and the Democratic Party this morning here on committee.
Thank you so much for that.
Okay. And
did I miss anything, or is this just a replay of last week?
The order, folks, colleagues, Mr. Sobera will return to you for your final points, and then we'll move on to the next members on the speaking list, which include Mr. Carey, Ms. Latanzio, Mr. Dong, and then continue to Mr. Barrett, Ms. Shanahan, and on we go.
Yeah, and Chair, to reach unanimity within the esteemed colleagues that are gathered here this morning on this ethics committee is on the access to information privacy and ethics committee, because we're not just we are a very multifaceted committee. Is motions can be withdrawn, motions can be amended, motions need to be debated, and that's what we are doing here with MP Fortin's motion. To recap, Mr. Angus, I just and I'll give you the 30 seconds Cole's notes version. Obviously, I'm in full in favor of transparency and accountability with respect to all motions, and this motion even more so. We did have ministers appear in front of committee.
Point of order, Chair.
Recognizing a point of order, Mr. Barrett.
Chair, you'll know that the members of the rules of relevance and repetition are important, and so while the intention may be good, there's no need for any speaker to recount their own points back to the committee, and it is in fact out of order for that to occur.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Sobera is aware of that. I know he's an experienced parliamentarian, and so I will encourage him to resist the temptation to repeat himself. Mr. Sobera, back to you for your final points.
Thank you, Chair, for your intervention. I'll be very frank. I sat on the Finance Committee for many years with the esteemed, your esteemed and honourable colleague from Carleton, and I know our chair on our side. When Pierre had the floor, and was always respectful to him, and always tried to be respectful for him. And I know you're doing the same here in a very tough situation as well. So I want to say thank you for that. I do hope we can reach. I do hope we can reach a conclusion where we look at Mr. Fortin's motion, where we can finally have an opportunity to reach some sort of consensus. In my heart and in thinking about it this morning as well, if we're able to, and just throwing this out there for thoughts and my thinking process today, be able to put this motion when we do the study, to put it in the appendix of the motion where it is cited, and I think that's maybe it may well be a reasonable thing to do in terms of answering the wishes of some of the committee members and us being able to cross that bridge together. At the same time, recognizes the fact that when it comes to accountability is in line with ministers and ministerial accountability. And I go back to that over and over again. If somebody directed someone to do something in life, or not directed someone not to do something in life, the buck stops with the minister and the ministers. And in any government, and that's been my point all along with this. And again, to MP Angus, not for repetition or anything to that extent, because my comment was over the weekend I did, and I don't want to repeat this, but I will repeat this. I use my LinkedIn account comprehensively. The reason that one of the members, the staffers, appears on the original ask to come speak and appears on this one here is because a message was sent to LinkedIn. And I send messages, and they're always actually pre-done because that's one of the options with LinkedIn. and I understand that. And to me, that was sort of disappointing, especially with all the evidence that we were presented, all the other documents that were presented and continue to be presented and continue to be received by this committee with regards to the organization that we dealt with, and the 7 hours of testimony that was provided by the brothers. That's where I'm at. I don't want to belabor this point. I actually would love just to wrap up at this point and move and then move the discussion on to the next member. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hands that are up that wish to speak to this. It's 11:58, and I've spoken with a considerable amount of time, and I just in my humble thoughts, where we can get to a point where we can move on. I really, as a member of parliament, my riding, I really would like to, and representing the constituents, the wonderful constituents I have the privilege of representing, I would like to move on and wrap this committee up, this study up as soon as possible, and then move on to, I think, the more pressing issue at hand, which is the Pornhub Mind Geek study. I think that has galvanized, and Charlie may not have seen this morning. MP Angus, you may not have seen this morning, the article from La Presse that's out from another individual with non-consensual images. The article that's out this morning with regards to the fire that happened in Montreal at the executive's home. So that's not to take away from this motion, but in my humble thoughts, in my brain this morning, I would love to move on to that the other folks. So I don't want to belabor the point to Mr. Warkentin and to MP Barrett, and I'm glad you had some time this weekend to spend time with your kids. I also have an 8-year-old, and it was cold, but we actually still went to the park. And
thank you, Mr. Sabera. Well, you can maybe catch up later on, just for the sake of
I will do that. I'm almost.
I do have Mr. Carey. I do have Ms. Latanzio and Mr. Dong.
Chair, I still do have the floor. I will stop.
I'll allow you to finish because I know that you were getting into small to personal discussions there, and I'm happy to have that happen, but probably best for the sake of the committee for that to happen at a different.
Absolutely, we want to use the committee's time in the most judicious and diligent manner, and the matters at the hand, which is the matters at hand of the 410 motion. I will sign off. I will turn over to the next speaker and just say that I do hope by the end of this meeting that we can come to a position where the committee is able to vote on something that's in front of us that we can agree to, get that to that vote, and also move on to wrapping this study up and moving on to making the recommendations that we feel necessary to make those recommendations with regards to the study that this motion is in reference to or deals with, and then also move on more importantly to the Pornhub Mind Geek study. So I'll stop there, Chair. It is 12 o'clock, and I thank my honorable colleagues for listening to my humble thoughts for the last half an hour or so.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sabera. Just a reminder to committee members that the only way that we can proceed to vote on anything is if we dispose of this motion first. And so if the intent is to get that done before the end of the meeting, this motion has to be disposed of before we can move on to anything else. Mr. Carey, we'll turn to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank my Liberal colleague because I think he's sincere that he'd like to see if we can get moving forward. But I would like to point out that only the Liberals are opposing this motion and only the Liberals are filibustering it. There's one way we could break this log jam and we could go right into a vote. I think I can agree with the member that, ultimately the ministers should be held accountable. But if we look back in the original motion, the Prime Minister was able to come and he refused that as well. So if we're looking at this issue, we have had ministers of the Crown tell other individuals to defy an order of the House. And I think what Mr. Fortin put together here is not only factual, but is quite reasonable for us to report that back to the House. I do want to thank my Liberal colleague, Mr. Sabera, because I think I have a solution. He brought up two specific points with the motion that he was having challenges with. And one was, why should we report this back to the House? I can tell him quite clearly the reason is because it was an order of the House and it needs to be reported back to the House because that was the order. The other thing he mentioned, he said he saw no evidence that a minister told an individual not to come before this House. And Mr. Chair, maybe we could send over to our Liberal colleagues, because I know Mr. Fergus said a similar thing. I actually have the letter from Minister Fortin right in front of me. And the second last line before sincerely, and I'm going to quote her letter so my Liberal colleagues can hear it. Accordingly, Mr. Ben Chin has been instructed not to appear before the committee. In his place, I will attend the meeting on behalf of the government on Thursday, the 8th of April, 2021. So there we have it right there. So I think, as the Liberals are percolating, I think everybody is percolating on this committee, Mr. Chair. But I think now that I've actually answered those two questions for the Liberals, I think if you poll the committee, not only you'll get the Conservatives, the NDP and the Bloc in agreement to report this very factual motion back to the House. Now that I've answered his two questions, I think we will be able to get unanimous consent for that. So with that, I'm not going to get into other comments that I could right now, but I think, Mr. Chair, if you could do that, I think I've answered both his questions quite clearly. And if that's what he was asking us to do, we've resolved the issue.
Again, I'll poll committee members. I'm still getting at least one member, a couple of members that are saying that they're not prepared to move to a vote. So we'll go to the next person on the list, Ms. Latanzio.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As member of the committee, I also understand that my colleagues want to cut short this debate or want to end this debate, but I think that we, as parliamentarians, all have the right to express our opinion on what is before us. So I will use this opportunity given to me this morning to speak on Mr. Fortin's motion. I do have a few points to raise. Last week and this morning, some of us have said that this motion is simple, that we have other priorities, that this is a waste of time. Well, we do agree. The motion is simple insofar as it is simply incorrect. And I'll tell you why that's what I think. This motion does not describe the facts as my colleagues have said. Let's look at it. It's been said that there's an order of the House, an order ordering witnesses to come before a committee. In paragraphs 5 and 6, the motion says the committee noted that Minister Pablo Rodriguez appeared on Monday, March 29th, 2021, instead of Rick Theis, after having ordered him not to appear before the committee, as mentioned in his letter to the chair received by committee members on Sunday, March 28th, 2021. The wording of this paragraph focuses on the fact that Minister Pablo Rodriguez is the one who told Rick Theis not to appear before the committee. I think the wording of this paragraph is deceiving because we don't have proof that such is the case. And even if we did have proof, if we look at Minister Rodriguez's letter, quoted by my colleague, Mr. Fortin, earlier. What does the letter say?
Conséquemment,
The letter says, consequently, Mr. Tice, Policy Director for the Prime Minister, was instructed not to appear before the committee. And here I underline, I will appear before the committee in his stead on March 29th. We are saying that the witness refused to appear before the committee. Well, I think it has been shown that these witnesses are employees of the ministers, and they are not the one accountable for decisions made by the ministers. It is up to the ministers to come before the committees. Mr. Fortin also says in his motion that since these three witnesses are not willing to appear, the Prime Minister can appear instead. Well, the Prime Minister also has the prerogative to ask other ministers to appear before the committee instead of him. So I understand that my colleagues wanted these three witnesses to come, but saying that these witnesses refused to appear is false, because we had two ministers before the committee. They took the time to come before our committee and answer our questions according to the order of the House. They came before the committee to testify on facts related to the topic of our study. When charges are laid and we want to get a testimony, we can ask employees of a company to come, but at the end of the day, who's responsible? The CEO of the company. They're the one responsible for their employees. They're the ones responsible before a court or a tribunal. They're the ones who should be ordered to appear. And it's the example I'm giving because I think we should be reasonable. It's the same process that has been followed here in the committee. But some members refuse to be satisfied with this. Paragraph 6 is same thing. The committee noted that Minister Mona Fortier also ordered witnesses Amitpal Singh and Ben Chin not to appear before the committee, as mentioned in her letters to the chair dated Tuesday, March 30th and Wednesday, April 7th, 2021. Minister Fortier sent us two letters dated March 30th and April 7th. And she says, consequently, Mr. Amitpal Singh was ordered not to appear before the committee. In his stead, and I underlined, she says, I will appear before the committee on Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. In her April 7th letter, the minister says, consequently, Mr. Benchin was ordered not to appear before the committee. In his stead, I will appear before the committee on behalf of the government on April 8th, 2021. Before I get to what happened when the ministers appeared.
Recognizing a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to, I was just listening to the translation, and it appears that the member is saying that Minister Fortier did not instruct Mr. Chin to come, but then she read from Minister Fortier's letter that actually said, in the translation said exactly what the letter says, that he was instructed not to come.
That's sounding a lot like a point of debate. It doesn't sound like a point of order. Pardon me. Was there another intervention there? Not seeing it, we'll turn back to Ms. Lattanzio.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, je lis le.
I'm reading the letters. So, what happened when the ministers appeared? But before I get to that, I'll open a parenthesis. How did we get there? How did we get to this motion tabled by Mr. Fortin? Previously, we heard that there was an exchange of messages on LinkedIn between Benchin and the We organization, which led to the issue. Well, there was a message. Was there an answer? There must be something suspicious in all this. We have to get to the bottom of this. We have to see what happened.
Mon intervention.
And I remember my intervention at the time, and several colleagues also said this. We received documents, Mr. Chairman, 5,000 pages worth of documents over the course of the summer to determine what had happened in this We Charity file. And had we taken the trouble to look through the documents, as I've previously mentioned, we would have seen that there was no correspondence or communication that tied in with the message sent via LinkedIn. So if we go back in time, there was this single communication, nothing further. The minister, Pablo Rodriguez, did state the following, or state what I said, and we even have a colleague, Elizabeth May, who, at the end of the appearance of the minister, stated, well, we're doing all of this. Had I known this, had I had that information provided in the House, well, perhaps the result would have been different. I think we have an obligation here. It is our duty to relate the facts as they stand. We must be transparent. With regard to our actions, we have that responsibility. And I wouldn't feel comfortable, how should I say this, relaying what I'd call positions or perhaps facts that don't fit with the text we have here, because we did hear these representations before the committee. And I asked myself questions. I'll be frank with you. I wasn't there on March 30th. I didn't sit that day I was there on the 29th, and I was also there on April 8th. But I did look at the minutes to see what took place on March 30th, or rather on the 29th of March. I was there, and we did hear what was said, and we spent a lot of time discussing the issue of whether or not we were going to hear the testimony of Minister Pablo Rodriguez. I don't remember how much time we devoted to that, but I must say that we even discussed the idea of hearing him or not. In the end, we did hear him. We did hear his testimony. Then we came back in committee with the issue of the other two witnesses. And here too, I'm somewhat surprised because during the course of our discussion on committee with regard to Ben Chin, I thought we were just discussing his situation. How is it that the two other witnesses were added on to the motion? I still don't know how that happened. And I'm thinking here of the testimony of Mr. Amitpal Singh and, forgive me, Mr. Chairman, I'm looking here. What's his name? Forgive me. I'm sifting through my papers here. On a point of order, Mr. Chairman, says Mr. Fergus.
Je crois que ma chère collègue cherche le nom.
I think you're looking for the name of Mr. Rick Tice. Yes, we haven't talked about him enough, it would seem. So how is it that these two individuals found themselves on the list? I must say that I'm surprised, but there you have it. That's what the House asked for. So the two others were added to the list. And as I said, this flowed from testimony heard by the committee relating to Ben Chin. And here too, Mr. Chairman, I would say this. I clearly remember that during the course of the summer of 2020, there even was a press conference held with regard to everything that took place in the We Charity file. And here we're coming back. And I'm looking at the facts here. We're coming back again, yet again, to this file in March. And we're going back to the House with a motion because we want to obtain information. So here, let's talk about information. We want this information so much that we want to subpoena witnesses before us. And once again, there's no need to go through all of the arguments, the process, the issue of ministerial accountability and our House tradition that is such that it's ministers who appear with regard to any decisions, any accountability. Witnesses, or rather staff, are always excluded. So I'm going back now to the 31st of March, and I see that our colleague, Mr. Barrett, I don't know how long it lasted, but at the very end, and forgive me, but I just have the English version in front of me, Mr. Chairman, and I'll quote him. He says at the end
that we need to examine the motion that Monsieur Fortin has just put forward. I move that the meeting be adjourned.
There is a motion. There is a motion to adjourn the meeting, colleagues. That is not a debatable motion, and so
no, I know that. I'm just.
Pardon me, Ms. Latanzio, were you moving a motion to adjourn the meeting?
No, all I'm doing is I'm citing from the minutes of the meeting of March 31st. Okay, so I'm just citing our colleague. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm not.
Very good.
Okay, so
Point of order, Chair, just while we have that disruption.
Recognizing point of order, Mr. Barrett.
Chair, just looking for your guidance. Is it in order for members to read back transcripts of previous meetings? You know, I'm just not sure that it's a standard practice of us to be quoting other members of the committee back to each other, and just looking to see if that's consistent with the rules in House of Commons procedures and practice.
I think I'll allow it as long as it's not repetition of the same. It is in some respects repetition, but not of the same meeting, of the same point, so I'll allow it. But a reminder to all colleagues, especially those who have intervened. Mr. Dong has indicated that he would like an opportunity to speak. He hasn't yet. Ms. Latanzio, I know that you probably have a few things left to complete, but you do have colleagues that are desperately waiting to get on the record as well.
I understand, Mr. Chair, but I'd like to seize the opportunity to speak on this issue as I have not
Point of order, Chair. Sorry,
recognizing a point of order, Mr. Dong.
I'm patiently waiting. I'm not desperately waiting. I'm patiently waiting.
Okay, I shouldn't have pointed out you directly, but I'm getting texts from others as well that are hoping to move to a vote and to be able to move on to the important work of this committee and to allow this motion to be disposed of. Ms. Latanzio, will return to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Donc, je disais que...
So, as I was saying, and I'm dealing here with the March 31st meeting, I was indeed quoting the motion put forward at the time by my colleague saying that he wanted the meeting to be adjourned with regard to the testimony of Minister Fortier. Mr. Chairman, I clearly remember that it was our break week, and God knows that we had the time to deal with this issue, and we'd had the opportunity. We'd had all sorts of time to ask our questions. We had as much time as we wanted for the minister, but from what I understand, the meeting was adjourned. What does that mean? The debate wasn't suspended. Members could easily have suspended debate, but we chose to adjourn the meeting. So we put an end to the testimony of Minister Fortier. And now we're being told in this request made by my colleague Mr. Fortin that the committee report these events to the House of Commons in order to express its dissatisfaction. I'm having trouble following him. It's quite bold, this text, because ministers did appear and we had the opportunity to ask all of the questions we wanted to put, and we didn't suspend the debate. We decided, for reasons that escape me, to put an end to the discussion. Let's now move to the meeting of April 8th. What happened on April 8th? I would also say, dear colleagues, that on March 31st, based on my understanding, there even was a debate when Minister Fortier appeared before us, before the committee. The debate was whether or not we'd hear her or not. In the end, we decided to hear her, and as I just mentioned, the debate was adjourned. On April 8th, and I was there that time, once again, the Honourable Mona Fortier, the minister, appeared. There was no failure to appear or non-appearance. She was there. And once again, we were discussing about listening to her or not. Was she the right witness or not the right witness? We discussed accountability, ministers' accountability, where we were at. And in the end, there was a discussion amongst colleagues, a debate. And colleagues asked what we were going to do. So we followed the discussion amongst colleagues, and once again, it wasn't deemed appropriate to hear Minister Mona Fortier. No questions were put to her. No information, no request for document was made to her. And once again, the debate was adjourned. So, Mr. Chairman, we have a responsibility, that of being able to relay facts about things as they happened. To say that there's dissatisfaction.
Je vois le comité aller, là.
I see the committee here. We have very important work to do, and I don't want to minimize the importance of my colleague's request, but my colleague, Mr. Sorbara, this morning said that here in Quebec, and I know that our colleague, Ms. Gaudreau, is very sensitive to this issue of Pornhub and MindGeek. This is very important work. Last week, as a matter of fact, we were prepared to deal with it. And what did we do, Mr. Chairman? We set aside the work of the committee in that area to once again debate this request. There are people who are counting on us. There really is a need to move to that study. There are people watching us to see how Canada will be dealing with this very important issue. And what do? We set it aside to come back once again to this request. So where's the urgency with regard to dealing with a motion that the committee looked at? It had the opportunity to call witnesses, but members said thanks, but no thanks. So we're taking time today, and we're saying that this is a waste of time. I agree. It's a waste of time having to come back to a motion asking for information and testimony, whereas the members of this committee said, no, we don't want to hear you. You're not the right witnesses. I don't want to hear you. I don't want to know anything about you. I just want to report this to the House, and there'll be consequences. With regard to the issue of knowing where we're headed, with regard to disposing of this motion or seeking a consensus, I believe that my colleagues this morning and even last week held out their hand in order for us to indeed move forward.
And I will tell you, I'm a new MP, and I just can't wait to really do a study, make reports. I'm sitting on another committee, and we're finishing up an interesting report, and I think that Canadians expect this from us. And more specifically, they want to see our report on MindGeek and Pornhub. So we have a responsibility. We have to move forward. And unfortunately, I've noticed that we've been wasting a lot of time at the committee. And I would tell you that I can see that last week and this morning as well, we really tried to see how we could move forward and see how we could reach a consensus so we can move forward. But we're at a dead end, we're at a deadlock, and I find this very unfortunate. I'm wondering, well, Mr. Sorbara and Mr. Fergus also tried to reach out, and I'm trying to see what happened, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering, I remember in another committee, I had proposed several studies. We had a lot of work to do in another committee, and we were trying to work in tandem. So if there are 2 hours at our disposition for a committee, if there is a lot of work to be done, maybe it would be logical, or maybe we could reach a consensus if my colleagues would agree, maybe we could talk about one subject for 1 hour, and for the second hour, we could talk about another subject. I think this would enable us to move forward with our business. But right now, as I see it, we're not moving forward. We're always at a deadlock. And I must tell you that I'm ready to move forward. I do want to move forward, and I do want our committee to be able to study all of the motions and all of these subjects. But we have to manage our time properly, and this has not been the case. It's as simple as that. It's crystal clear. I can see that the members of the committee want to move forward. We do want to listen to the witnesses of Pornhub and MindGeek, but unfortunately, we start meetings in camera, and then we have televised meetings in order to study this motion. And the motion says something that does not explain adequately what happened at the committee. Hey, Mr. Chair, I would like to ask Mr. Fortin if he would be ready to reassess or reevaluate his motion, and if he would be ready to withdraw his motion in order to enable our committee to move forward so we can study MindGeek and Pornhub and other studies that were proposed by the committee. I do understand that Mr. Fortin wants to tell the House that there was a problem, something was not working out, and that he wants to report that the order was not obeyed and that this should be mentioned. But you must know that this report, if you go ahead with this report, then the report will have to explain what happened. As you know, in committees, we hear witnesses. Witnesses report events. And I can't believe that a committee will report about something that did not happen at the committee. I can't believe that a report will be made to say we were supposed to hear witnesses. They came, a witness came in lieu of, but we decided that we would not listen to them. They were not the right witnesses, and we decided we did not want to hear these witnesses. And now, because of that, now we're expressing our dissatisfaction. I think we have to accept responsibility for what is happening, and I would like to ask my colleague, Mr. Fortin, I would like to tell him that I think that what he should do right now would be to withdraw his motion. And maybe he could propose another motion. He could move another motion, a motion that would really take into account everything that happened at the committee. Because I believe that it would not be desirable, and I can see how the members voted so far in the committee. I don't want to presume that they will vote in one way or another because you can't say this in advance, but if I look at how the members voted in the past, I don't think that this motion should be adopted. I think that if we adopt the motion as is, I don't believe that this is an accurate description of what happened. So once again, We have a job to do, and I do respect all of my colleagues. I know that most of you have more experience than I do at committees. I listen to you. I'm very interested in what you have to say. But I think we have a responsibility here. And we even have an obligation. We have to report precisely what happened. And unfortunately, when I look at this motion, it does not explain what truly happened. And this is why I would like to ask my colleague, Mr. Fortin, to withdraw his motion. He should withdraw the motion, and maybe we would agree upon another motion if the motion explains correctly what happened. Because the motion as is a simple motion, but it does not adequately reflect the facts. It does not adequately reflect the facts as I have seen them.
Recognizing a point of order, Mr. Angus.
Yes, we've heard for the last 20, 30, 40 minutes from Madame Latanzio that she doesn't like the motion and she wants it withdrawn. She just keeps repeating it. Is she asking formally so that we can vote, or turn it over to Mr. Fortin? But she keeps telling us the same story. She doesn't like the motion. She wants it withdrawn. Then she starts over again and tells us the same story. I think she's using this to waste our time.
Okay, so
Mr.
obviously,
Chair, point of privilege. A point of privilege, Mr. Chair.
Point of privilege. We are. Pardon me. I'm still on. Before we get to the point of privilege, we do have a point of order. I'm going to recognize that there has been some repetition. Obviously, the member has been encouraged to make new points, not to repeat old points. We will make an effort to deal with the broader issue. So far, Madame Latanzio has not indicated if she is formally asking for something to be withdrawn. So I don't think that we can move to a vote on that or seek unanimous consent on that. But Madame Latanzio, if you'd like to move to have the motion withdrawn, there will have to be unanimous consent to do that. But on the point of privilege, Madame Latanzio.
I'm being told, or I'm being accused, that I do not like the motion. What I'm saying is, and I'm going to say it in English so that there's clarity and that it's well understood.
Okay, so this is. It sounds like this is a point of debate. I'll let you have the floor back and then move into the points of debate that if you're looking to seek some clarification with regards to what's been, how your words have been interpreted. Reminding you, Madame Latanzio, that we do have a lengthy speaking list yet. Back to you.
Monsieur le Président, justement, c'est...
Mr. Chair, I'm not saying that I don't like the motion. I'm not saying that I like it or that I don't like it. What I wanted to say is that the motion does not adequately relate the facts. And this is why I do not agree with the wording of the motion. This does not mean that I don't like the motion. It's not about if I like it or not. What I'm saying is that this motion is a simple motion, but it does not adequately relate the facts. I'm sorry if I'm repeating this message, but I have to repeat it because I want it to be crystal clear for everybody. If I'm repeating myself, I think it's necessary because I think that some of our colleagues have not understood what I was saying, and I'm sorry about that. I do apologize if they did not understand what I was mentioning. I just wanted to say that this motion...
Recognizing point of order, Mr. Angus.
I'm very, very sorry that I reminded Madame Latanzio about not repeating because it's given her a chance to just repeat the same talking points again and again. She's interfering with our work. We've got better things to do. So is she asking to have that motion withdrawn? Otherwise, can she give the floor to someone who has something new to say?
Okay, so I'd like to remind Madame Latanzio, even if you think that it would be helpful to repeat yourself, the rules don't allow for that. And so I'd discourage you from repeating what has already been said. There is a growing frustration, and I can feel it from all sides with regards to the committee as to how we move forward. There is only two ways we can move forward from where we're currently at. Either there's unanimous consent for the motion to be withdrawn. So that's one option. I'm getting some heads nodding against that option. I do require unanimous consent in order to do that. So if that's not an option, then the only way to move forward would be for us to actually have a vote on the motion so that we can dispose of it and then move on to another issue. And so I just want to remind colleagues there's an impatience that is in everybody's comments, that there's a desire to move on. Those are the only two options allowed for committee members. Either we have unanimous consent for the motion to be withdrawn, or that we actually get to a vote so that we can dispose of it one way or another. Those are the only two options. Ms. Latanzio will return to you for your final comments.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very happy to see that all of the members understood why I disagree with this motion. I'm actually just asking my colleague to consider withdrawing his motion, but it is not up to me to propose such a motion. So I'm giving him the opportunity to think about this, and if Monsieur Fortin wants to withdraw it, it's up to him to withdraw it. The only thing that I could say right now is that I think we should adjourn the debate on this motion, because I think most of us have expressed our viewpoint, and I think that this would enable Mr. Fortin to reformulate the wording of his motion, or maybe even withdraw his motion. So I would propose a motion to adjourn the debate.
I think I'm seeking some clarification, Madame Latanzio. There seems to be some confusion with regards to what you just proposed. Monsieur Fortin is not able to withdraw his motion without unanimous consent of the committee. And so even if that was desired, I'm getting an indication that that's not, that is not an option. Are you seeking to move to a vote with regards to the motion that Monsieur Fortin's motion? Are you seeking to have a vote on that?
I'm seeking. Okay, I'll say it in English. I'm seeking to adjourn debatement on Mr. Fortin's motion.
Okay, so seeking. You've moved a motion to adjourn debate. So let's move to a roll call on that, Madam Clerk.
On Ms. Latanzio's
point of order, Chair. I just point of order. Chair.
This is not a debate. This is not a debate.
I'm not debating. Point of clarification.
There's no ability for a point of clarification, Mr. Dong. I do apologize, Madam Clerk.
I just want to understand the process a little bit. As I'm a new
You're
member,
interrupting the vote.
I'm not.
You don't have the right.
Colleagues, order. Colleagues, order. Madam Clerk, let's continue with the vote.
Chair.
Mr. Dong, Mr. Dong, there is no point. There is no debate on this motion. It's a non-debatable motion. Moving to the vote, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Dong.
I vote yes.
Mr. Fergus.
Oui.
Ms. Latanzio.
Yes.
Ms. Shanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sorbara.
Yes.
Mr. Barrett.
No.
Mr. Carey.
No.
Mr. Gould.
No.
Monsieur Fortin.
No.
Mr. Angus.
No.
Yeas pour 5, nays contre 5.
Okay, we will continue with the debate on the motion. Ms. Latanzio, did you have any final comments? Ms. Latanzio, you are on mute.
I'm sorry about that. Donc, j'inviterai.
I would invite my colleague, Mr. Fortin, to reconsider his motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning to Mr. Dong.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I see the growing list of members wants to speak to this motion. So I think we will hear the debate for a little longer. I'm very pleased to have a chance to speak to this motion, as I haven't had a chance yet. And I know my honorable colleagues on the committee would all agree that, you know, although we may disagree may or may not disagree on certain things, especially when it comes to this very important study, but we all agree that you know, members' right to speak and members' privilege should be respected. That's a very important you know, point for all parliamentarians. One benefit, actually, Chair, for me to listen to all my members is actually I listen to their points and making observations. The one observation I can share with you, Chair, is the consistency in inconsistency that I've been witnessing here. You know, whether it's the government members today or government member in the past, it seems that, you know, there were evidence, records pulling out showing that when members were in government in the past, previous government, their position changes. So I understand that. I'll be very mindful to what I say today, so it won't be used later on against me. I'm actually looking at this motion as part of the larger motion to study the procurement policies of the government. In fact, I should share with you, Chair, that going back to the very early debate of the study, I had questions on whether or not it's appropriate to do a study that parallels with the commissioner's or investigation, because we know that there is an ongoing investigation on what we are talking about. We've heard from witnesses, people like the former commissioner of Integrity Commissioner Kim and other professionals warn us basically that the dangers of the study may contaminate with the finding of the actual investigation that's taking place. But you know, we debate on that. We spend a lot of time debating on the merits of the study, on the details. We debate on the amendments, and we move forward. And it's been a long time. You know, I see that there's a big change to the membership of this committee. But to Mashu Gord, Ms. Shanahan, and I, we've been sitting through this these debates of this study entirely. So for the benefit of the viewers today, some may get confused of what are we talking about, why there is such a difference in positions on this very, you know, seems to be a detailed part of this overall study. And I can share with you that, you know, more than you know, after we had extensive debate on whether or not this the study is appropriate, we moved on. You know, the members of this committee moved on. We debated, and we debated on the witnesses when we invite them. And what I observed again, you know, patiently sitting and listening to members and witnesses, is that there were a lot of people affected by this study. You know, we heard from the witness from speakers spotlight how their employees were affected to a point that they were receiving threats and affecting their families' daily routine. That is sort of the negative outcome of this study. You know, I want to make sure that we pay attention to this. And then we entering the you know, debate on whether or not a public office holders' relatives' financial information should be shared publicly. And we after 5,000 pages being released by the government, and we had an extensive debate on this. We had amendments, we have votes, we have change of votes. Like we had a long history of of looking into the details of this study. And I want to just point out that at the end of the day, we're studying the procurement policy and procedures to make sure the integrity of the government process is upheld. In this case, however, there was not a single cent of public dollar transferred to We Charity. We are doing this work to prevent incidents from the future, and it's for all good reasons. I understand that. We called witnesses after witnesses, and to be honest, Chair, going to the listening to the witness from the Kilberger brothers, I honestly thought I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. I thought that was the sort of the last stage of the study. Then we can all ready to complete this study that we've been dragging on, has been stalling actually a lot of other important work of the committee. And then what happened was that the honorable member from Carleton, subbed in the committee, asked a question on something that was already in the public. August last year, August 2020, it was reported that there was exchange on LinkedIn between the Kilberger brothers and Ben Chan. It wasn't in news. We had almost 8 months. If we thought that this was important, that that simple reply was important, we could have called them in a long time ago. We could have talked about this a long time ago. No, it was just, it came out of this this questioning between the member from Carleton and the Kilberger brothers, and there was a aha moment, in which I still have difficulty to understand, what was so aha about it. We heard Mr. Sabara calling this study a fishing expedition, and I think as it was that time, I really felt there was a fishing expedition. As a it's like you go on a trip and hoping to catch a bass, and you caught a perch. Aha! There must be another something else we want to dig into, and that started a whole new chapter of this never-ending study. And I just respectfully asked members to go back to the original the motive, the intent of this study, and ask yourself, what are we doing here? We had the study on MindGeek, Pornhub. It was going well, and it was so important. We thought to interrupt the study to allow us to invite the witnesses from like the representative from Stella and whatnot. Chair, are you taking a picture of me? Oh, okay. I'll continue on.
No, there's. I'm taking a picture of the speaking order so that.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. Chair. Yeah, so we all agreed to interrupt the study briefly to hear from these witnesses, and then I heard the motion to extend the hours so the more witnesses can come forward to give us a comprehensive view on the Pornhub study, because we are at the power to recommend through the House to the government the actions needs to be taken to protect those vulnerable youth especially, but at the same time respect people's right to privacy, to expression, and right to work. We got to keep that balance. So I thought those testimony were very, very important. But we are again talking about this, Mr. Fortin's motion brought us right back into this this extensive debate on a motion that on a study that looking to money that was never spent by the government. So I just want to ask my respectful members, just keep your prior. Like I look at all these, whether it's face recognition, whether it's porn. Those are more. These are more urgent and should be on a higher position on our priority list of the committee. And obviously we're in a deadlock, as cited by Ms. Latenzio. I'm wondering, well, you said that there are two options. One is to withdraw, for Mr. Fortin to withdraw the motion. One is to vote on the motion. The other, is to suspend it or to adjourn the debate and then move on to, maybe perhaps another study and park this for a little while and, let our caucus and colleagues to work out the difference. Maybe they're brilliant, more brilliant than we are. Maybe they can work out the difference and find a common ground and give them some time to work it out, but not to stall the work of the committee, and we can move on to something that's more urgently needed. And I think when I talk about facial recognition, and Mr. Angus and Mr. Fergus would agree with me, and I heard from my community that there's a lot of interest in this, and we are losing. The window is closing. The window of the opportunity is closing. We're losing a very important, precious opportunity to give a sound study and review of what's going on right now. But I don't want to go on and repeat myself. But I sincerely ask members to kind of look at this motion and understand that this is a sort of a outcome or part of the outcome of a very random question, and I can't help to suspect that, if the opposition, whether the conservative, whether the Bloc caucus, has any interest to complete the study, because I said, from the beginning, going back last year till now, concessions after concessions after concessions from the liberal caucus. We agreed to look at these documents, and we had a huge debate on this. And what happened? Those documents were released to the members. Did any new evidence come out of that? Our ability to look at other members, family members' financial situation? No information, no new information. And did this whole, study or a questioning of staff, was it based on new information? No, it wasn't. It was based on old news from August last year. So you can't blame me for suspecting that opposition has no intention. When I say opposition, of course, I don't mean everybody, but I asked if the leadership of the Conservative caucus, the leadership of the Bloc caucus, has any interest to complete this study. We can vote on this motion, and is that the end of it? I really have to doubt it, because based on what I've seen, there is no interest, and there is only interest to drag this on to stop the important work of the committee. Of course, I hear members on the committee talk about how much they want to move into other important studies, but I can't see it. Irrationally, I'm judging by what I'm hearing, the action taking place in the last 8, 9, 10 months, and I can't come to a conclusion that there is interest to wrap up this study. So I said it. That's just my observation. It may be unfair, but I'm still waiting for that gesture to assure me that there is a lot of interest to move on. And through you, Chair, to my honorable colleagues, please give me that gesture. Because we've been very close to the end many times. We've been given the gestures, and we believed it. We took on, we took a dive, we said, well, let's do it. And the random question, member from Carleton, everything is back in the cycle again, and back in the circle again, and we're just chasing our tails. So with that, I'll cede the floor. I don't want to unnecessarily extend the conversation. If I see another point that I want to debate, I'll come back. But with that, I will cede the floor to my honorable members. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on with the debate, we'll move to Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm not sure how many meetings the members of the Liberal Party are going to want to drag this motion out over. It's very clear that they believe that because they get their say, they're going to get their way. They were very happy when they had a majority to impose their majority on parliamentarians. But now that they're in a minority, we have a situation where a majority of members of the House of Commons voted to have witnesses appear at this committee. There was an order issued of the House, and then this committee received correspondence from 2 ministers saying that they instructed people not to come to committee. And we've heard the quotes from those letters. It's very clear in the letter from the government House leader and from the Minister for Middle Class Prosperity that there was instruction given. We've heard about ministerial accountability, and so these ministers are responsible for their staff. They're responsible for giving that instruction. Now we all and it's very frankly it's crystal clear in the letters. Quote from Ms. Fortier's letter dated March 30th. Mr. Amitpal Singh has been instructed to not appear before the committee. Close quote. In the letter from the government House leader, and that's that letter, it's very clear again. Quote, Mr. Rick Tice, Director of Policy to the Prime Minister, has been instructed to not appear before the committee, close quote. So those are directions given by ministers. And so the motion that we're dealing with today lays that out very clearly. And look, if members of the Liberal Party are not happy with the motion, they of course get their say in the meetings, but then they have to vote. It has to come to a vote, and I appreciate that can be inconvenient. But when we keep hearing that this is the result of a fishing expedition, this is a report back to the House. And by not allowing that vote, by blocking that vote from happening, not only are they delaying all of the other work from happening, it's part of an effort to cover up corruption in the Liberal government. And that's very clear. We heard that Liberals don't understand why we're dealing with this.
Point of order.
May. Recognizing a point of order, Ms. Shanahan.
Chair, I object to the use of unparliamentary language.
I didn't hear unparliamentary language.
The word corruption.
I don't know that was in reference or being if members were being called corrupt. I believe that there was. I think there's a distinction there. Thank you, Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, and Chair, I object to corruption in government. And so, while I didn't call individual members corrupt, I do encourage them to appeal to their conscience and to their better angels when dealing with corruption. If the sound of the word is so offensive, my goodness, I would hope that their actions would speak louder than those words, and they would look to take positive steps to demonstrate to Canadians that they can have confidence in their institutions, which is, of course, what's being undermined with this whole process, this nonstop filibuster. As I was saying, we heard from the Liberal members that they don't understand, well, what's changed since August? Well, I'll tell you what changed. To cover up corruption, there was Parliament shut down in August. There were filibusters across this committee, more than 20 meetings worth of filibusters. So it's very clear that the Liberals want to continue to block this report from going to the House. They can disagree with it, and they can speak with their votes when they do that. But it's plain for everyone to see that there's no desire to move on to the other business. And we heard, we hear people swinging for the fences. The Liberals are hoping that by not saying that the NDP are looking for this to happen, that maybe the NDP will go the other way. I got to tell you, I've heard very clearly from all opposition members that they want to report to the House that their votes, the votes of opposition members, to have this
point
issue.
Of clarification, Chair.
That's not in order. A point of clarification.
Order, Mr. Dong. You've had your time. This is not there is no such thing as a point of clarification, Mr.
I'm sorry,
Mr.
Chair.
Barrett.
Point of order.
Continue.
Point of order.
Recognizing a point of order, Mr. Dong.
Yeah, sorry to Mr. Barrett. I don't mean to rudely interrupt him, but I think he was speaking on behalf of an NDP member. which from another caucus. I don't know if
Sorry,
that's appropriate.
What are you
Now
saying?
that's my point of order. I would
with
ask
due
both
respect,
the Conservatives and Liberals not to speak in my name. We will make our decision when we. make it.
thank you,
I
Mr.
didn't
Angus,
try to
Mr.
just
Dong,
so you know, I didn't.
Mr. Dong. I'll continue to chair this meeting, and I appreciate your efforts to do so. But I will continue my work. Mr. Barrett, you've got the floor.
Well, and I listened intently to Mr. Dong when he was speaking, and don't let the facts get in the way of a filibuster, saying that no money went from the government to We Charity. Well, that is patently false. In fact, the government of Canada gave $30 million, which We Charity failed to repay over a series of months. And it wasn't until public pressure, it wasn't until this bad deal for taxpayers, this insider arrangement, where we had the Prime Minister give a $500 million agreement to an organization that gave his family members $500,000 until opposition members dragged that into the daylight, that we saw calls for it to be repaid and the need for study, which resulted in a parliamentary shutdown and filibusters across the committee, including this. So look, if the Liberals want to continue this filibuster for many meetings, I know that I can't speak for, and nor would I ever look to speak for other members of the opposition. They're very capable of doing that, and I hope that they have the opportunity to do that in further meetings when we continue to be filibustered by this attempt to cover up corruption. But Chair, if we're going to continue this for many meetings, I would move that we suspend this meeting and continue the Liberal filibuster of corruption at the next meeting.
I believe that was a motion to suspend the meeting. We'll move to a vote. It's a non-debatable vote, non-debatable motion. Madam Clerk, if you'll go through the roll call.
Mr. Dong,
Yes, I'll agree.
Mr. Fergus,
Excusez-moi, oui, je suis en faveur.
Madame Latanzio,
Yes.
Ms. Shanahan,
Yes.
Mr. Sorbara,
Oui.
Mr. Barrett,
Yes.
Dr. Carey,
Yes.
Monsieur Gould,
Oui.
Monsieur Fortin,
Oui.
Mr. Angus.
No.
Yeas pour 9, nays contre 1.
Colleagues, the meeting is suspended.
Chair, I would like to confirm that I am first on the list for next time.